very interesting statistics. More women are diagnosed with depression compared to men, but more men actually commit suicide compared to women. Then you realize that women are more health-seeking. As men, we tend to sit, eventually get to a point where one commits suicide.
Very special topic today. We're discussing men's health from a mental and from a physical perspective. So hopefully we brought the right guest today to discuss this matter. Dr. Thabang Dima. Is society actually conniving against men and boys? The families are not together. The uncles are not playing the role. The boy child is so isolated. Have we set up this negative, unfortunate situation for the boy child and ultimately the man?
In a way, if you really look into it, society is conniving. It's more supportive of a boy child to fail than anything. As men, there's a lot of pressures that we put on other men. Women have expectations on men that I think sometimes they don't realize how these expectations actually mold or carve what kind of person this person is going to be.
62% of consultations, they found that it's actually related to mental health, as you rightly said. Men compared to women, men commit suicide 4 times compared to women. Would you confirm that emerging crisis is hitting Botswana, maybe even Africa?
Mental health in the UK is such a big thing. There's a lot of support for mental health as a problem compared to us here, where we really have absolutely little to none. Right now, I can tell you it's only February. There's been 3 or 4, if I can count properly, if I remember, suicides. It's only February. And these are people that I know of. There's others that I don't know of that have done it. And it's just the beginning of the year.
Welcome to the GrowthWell podcast, where we tap into a well of knowledge, innovation, and leadership to fuel Africa's growth. Here, we explore thought-provoking insights and expert knowledge that empower individuals and businesses to thrive across the continent. Whether it's personal development or professional advancement, our conversations inspire action and impact. This is GrowthWell, where ideas flow and growth begins. Let's dive in.
Welcome to GrowthWell podcast. We are back, and very special topic today. We're discussing men's health from a mental and from a physical perspective. You might ask, why men? Because sometimes the debate is that if you're focusing on men, you're somehow anti-women. And I just like to qualify that's not the approach. If possible, we will also talk about the girl child next time with a relevant expert. So today is really on mental health, an issue that I think is emerging and maybe not receiving the right attention. So hopefully we brought the right guest today to discuss this matter, Dr. Thabang Dima. Welcome, sir.
Thank you so much for having me. I think it's quite an important thing to embark on. Full disclaimer from the start. I am no psychologist. No psychiatrist, but I do have a bit of experience in terms of mental health and just physical health in general. Medical doctor by professions, but also a mental health advocate.
Excellent. So you do believe that, men and women, I suppose, there is a need for supportive structures for people to deal with the stresses of today, not just from a physical perspective.
Yeah, definitely, especially for men. Not to say we're neglecting women or anything, but there's a lot that's been done to empower women. And in this essence, we end up leaving men behind. We are the problem in terms of mental health, because our mental health is so neglected. So there is need for supportive structures in place to make sure that men's mental health are a focus, to avoid so many social ills that we encounter, especially in our today lives.
Excellent. Dr. Tim, before we go in detail in terms of a background, I always start on a light moment and just share some perspective from a health or happiness perspective. You must have picked it up from the podcast. So today I just like to I've talked about the cold shower, which a lot of controversy. Some people have come up and said, not me. And today we've talked about the cold shower for a number of episodes. So today I want to focus on another very powerful aspect of longevity for those who are very interested in having a happy and long life and those that are dealing with weight. And something that has also worked very well for me, and that's intermittent fasting. I've been practicing intermittent fasting now for, I think, 5-6 years, and it has done wonders for me. And I've always believed historically that men and women eat too much. And it's because I've observed animals. I like watching animals, just nature, lions and cheetahs. And I was like, if a lion can take 3 weeks without a meal, and then they pound on a buffalo, and then they take another month without things. There must be, even when you go back to our tribes, the Botswana, when we were nomads, when we were hunter-gatherers, we will actually go for days without eating. And say, is there a health aspect? And now all the experts on longevity and health have done all the science and proof that there's a lot of benefit in terms of your immune system and giving your gut a break, what they call the microbiome with all the millions and millions of bacteria in there. So I found the benefit. One of the top longevity experts, a guy called Dr. David Sinclair at the University of Harvard, who is a longevity expert. And he says out of all the things, whether it's supplements or cold showers or whatever, he found intermittent fasting the best thing for him and his dad in terms of especially maintaining weight, which is, you'll know that weight is a big issue. So that's the one I wanted to share with you. And I don't know what you think about that. I see you are busy turning on your chair.
Yeah, because you know what? When it comes to such kind of matters, I think, like you're saying, Dr. Sinclair said, is the best for him.
For him, yes. Yes.
Intermittent fasting works for some people. It doesn't work for
some.
People. I think the most important thing, especially when it comes to weight loss or any fitness, is to find out what works
for that
you.
Specific biology.
Yeah.
Yes.
Some of us can't fast. We can't go.
Let's go without eating.
Go without eating. Like I would be I'm very, very grumpy.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if I'll be able to even practice medicine if
without having eaten.
So I have to eat.
Yeah.
But I found what works for me, which is maintaining a balance, eating right, exercising.
That's correct.
In
good
amounts. So I do know of the thought of intermittent fasting. I've seen results with a few of my patients who said, okay, Dr. D, we've tried this. I went to a dietitian. I've consulted with a dietitian. The plan is to go on intermittent fasting, but it's guided by a dietitian. So
that's correct.
And it has worked for them. So I think identifying what works for you is key.
And I think it's a beautiful qualifier, especially that, being a doctor, I'm not a doctor. And there are certain people, if you're diabetic, you've got to be careful in terms of intermittent. So we've got to qualify, and I'm glad that you are here to say it works for certain people, and also get medical advice.
Get medical advice. In
terms of your situation, because it just doesn't work for every.
Yeah, because next thing you're diabetic, you go on and fast.
That's correct.
You will go to a hospital fast. Yep.
And just to, some of you might be wondering how I do it. What I do is I have an early dinner around 6, 7. And then remember, then obviously go to bed around 10:30, 11. And then breakfast in the morning. I break the fast much later in the morning. So I start, my next meal will be after about 14 hours. So I'll start my breakfast around 11. And the body is now, like you said, is used to it. And this it's wet fasting. So I'll have the water. I'll even have a cup of coffee in the morning. So that's as far as I go. So just to clarify that.
So it's not necessarily you're starving yourself.
No. It's not these 3 days, 2 days. I used to do every Tuesday wet fast where I don't eat the whole day. That was a bit torturous. I actually did that for about 1.5 years. But like you said, at work, and I'm a consultant, it gets a bit hectic in the afternoon and everything. So that's why I liked. Then for me, the intermittent one worked better.
Great.
Yeah.
I mean, it's working clearly.
So Doc, I talked about, you are a busy man. You, even as we discussed earlier, you have worked, and you got a family in England, and you see lots of, you also now do a bit of counseling, although you're not a psychologist, you said. So that must be quite calling on your system. So just to ask, what keeps you going in terms of keeping that energy and excitement when you see your clients, before we get into your professional side of things?
Yeah, I think for me, when I finished med school, there was a bit of an issue with me writing exams. I had, I'll tell you a story. When I was in the last rotation of our clinical years, I got a needle prick from a patient with HIV.
Oh.
It was very rare in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
And
you studied in the Caribbean.
Yeah. So I had to go through PrEP. So during my final exam, I was taking PEP, or post-exposure prophylaxis. Back then, it was a bunch of drugs, and you would have the worst side effects: diarrhea, vomiting, loss of appetite, dizziness, hallucinations. So during my exam, I was going through all these symptoms. So I remember I sat down and I had a little prayer to God to say, you know what, if I pass, I know we're not supposed to do this bargaining, but if I pass, what I'll do is I'll do a service in terms of my work to people.
Okay.
So I think that's what drives me most in terms of doing work. I am a problem solver. I like looking at problems and coming up with solutions. I think that's why I ended up in a field or taking mental health, especially for men, as an interest and something to focus on, or something to actually build solutions for. Because I realized at the clinic, the data suggests that majority of the guys that we see, even though they have physical manifestations of the diseases, they actually is a mental health aspect
behind it.
And in our country, statistics show that in our country we are really, really struggling. So I figured, I think that's what pushes me to want to do more. That's what keeps me going at the clinic. That's what keeps me going in my day, to actually want to do more and be impactful to Botswana as a nation.
So the saving aspect is something that's really keep you going.
Is what keeps me going.
That's where your fulfillment comes from.
Yeah. It does sometimes get a little bit of an unhealthy habit where you become more of a workaholic.
Yes.
You can abandon the family, you abandon other things.
That's correct.
So you have to
provide the balance, make sure there's a good balance.
Make sure there's a good balance.
Yeah. And then on your professional side, just briefly take us through your professional, and then also how you ended up looking at the mental and the physical side of your
so
GP.
I run a clinic. It's a GP clinic. We have a few specialists at our clinic. We're trying to provide holistic care for Botswana. So what actually drove me to here is that I work with a lot of young people, a lot of corporates, and like I said, I like data. The data shows that, majority of the patients that we see need more counseling than consultations. My consultations have shifted from consultations to now counseling, where you find yourself spending more time with a person, asking or learning about their personal things that are stresses to their lives. And then from there, they actually feel like, we've gotten a doctor's help rather than medication.
Correct.
So that's what shifted, or not really shift, but that's what influenced me saying, okay, I'm going to be an advocate for men's mental health, because I can see that we're struggling. We don't have a lot of men who do it. We don't have a lot of platforms,
support structures for that.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you just tell us a little bit about your Hoparalaga UK and here briefly. I think you have a little bit of experiences in the UK.
I think the one thing about being there is that you realize that mental health in the UK is such a big thing. It's a concern for everyone. Everyone has mental health issues, if I can say that.
Yeah.
And there's so much advocacy for it. There's so much, treatment plans in place. There's so much supportive structures in place.
The NHS in itself has got a solid mental.
Even outside the NHS, there's a lot of support for mental health as a problem, compared to us here, where we really have absolutely little to none. So I think being in these two different places has actually fueled me more to say, okay, we need to do more. We need to actively do this. I've done a few sessions, like 6 weeks training sessions with men about, being a man in our society, dealing with different societal pressures. How do we deal with it? How do you navigate being a dad? I'm a parent myself. How do you navigate being a partner? How do you navigate being a colleague to somebody at work? And all of these things are obviously influenced by my work experience in terms of being a clinician, seeing patients, understanding patients, but also being a man among men who struggle with the same.
Correct.
Same
Because we
kind
all,
of
as you said, we are all affected.
We're all affected by it.
Yeah. That's very impressive, man. Especially that you know that I'm a father of 3 boys and a girl. So the manifestations of today's challenges, I've got even my nephews, even sons of my workers at of my fellow workers at the workplace. So it's I think it's something that's not being given the right attention, as you rightly said. And I think people like you who've now decided to really jump in there, that's commendable. I always say, every September, the president will be giving all these awards to people. I say there are people that are actually doing very valuable work that get unrecognized, I'm putting you up there now.
Yeah, I actually feel like I once spoke of a simple thing that speaking about men's mental health, a simple thing gesture that I once did for a patient of mine, and we end up just engaging because I noticed that they had a lot of stress, even though they'll be coming to the clinic with 1, 2, 3, 4. And I said, okay, you know what's going on? What's really stressing you out? And we ended up getting him to go and see a therapist. And our conversations was very, very simple conversations. Like it was now outside the consultation room, just men engaging. And a few weeks later, he comes and says, shares a note with me to say, I had actually wrote a suicide note.
Really?
As a means to end it. But we had a conversation and I decided, I'm going to go to therapy and this has really helped me out. And I can tell you, I'll repeat this, I did nothing special. We just had a conversation. And I think that's where it starts. With men's mental health, that's where it starts, with us having conversations, just being vulnerable, accepting that, vulnerability isn't a weakness.
Yeah.
It's a strength that we have. Society puts so much pressure on us. As much as, what the men are a problem, we have a lot of pressures that society puts on us. And clearly, we are dysfunctional. We are failing to deal with these societal pressures. So we need to come together as men, have these conversations so that we can actually help each other in navigating these pressures that we have.
So in terms of the manifestation, I know you say you're a data man, and I know that from research that has been done, they say 62% of consultations, they found that it's actually related to mental health, as you rightly said. And then you, from the UK, they report that, men compared to women, men commit suicide 4 times compared to women. Similarly, use of drugs, it's primarily boys and all that. Now, would you confirm that emerging crisis is hitting Botswana, maybe even Africa? We're going to be facing the same thing because it's a global
Actually,
it's a global problem.
It's a global problem. If you really look at the data, even from World Health Organization, will show you that very interesting statistics. More women are diagnosed with depression compared to men. But more men actually commit suicide compared to women. Then you realize that women are more health-seeking. When women go through all these pressures and everything, they can go and seek help. As men, we tend to sit, eventually get to a point where one commits suicide.
Yeah.
And if you look at home in our country, right now, I can tell you it's only February. There's been 3 or 4, if I can count properly, if I remember properly, that I know of, suicides. It's only February. And these are people that I know of. There's others that I don't know of that have done it. And it's just the beginning of the year. More men involved in GBV, and it's just beginning of the year. So this goes to show that men actually have mental health issues. We have a higher rate of suicide, and women attempt to commit suicide. Men commit.
Go all the way.
Yeah, they go all the way. That's why our suicide rate is higher than women.
Yeah.
We actually get the job done.
What baffles me, I was going to discuss it later, but since you mentioned it in terms of men, or in terms of suicide statistics, is that I think 1 year, first Botswana, despite the economics of Botswana compared to other African countries, were in the top 7 in terms of rates of suicides, which is quite interesting because people sometimes say, if you come out of poverty, you are rich, then you can't, you should be okay, which is something that I'm sure you've seen, very rich guys still having issues. But what baffles me is the depth of suicides in Botswana relative to a country that's supposed to be progressing very well. Has it got economic connotations to it from your observation or from your practices?
I think so, because if you really look into it, a lot of the people who commit suicide tend to have, I wouldn't say money issues, but money plays a very big role. Money plays a big role in relationships. If relationship fails and there's a money aspect to it, someone feels that they can't provide, then they end up committing suicide. I think suicide in terms of on its own, we have to look at it from all different facets. So obviously our economic structures and our economic standing would have an impact on it. But I think it's a lot more than that, because if you really look at one of the things that we struggle with as Botswana, conflict resolution. Majority of our suicides, majority of our GBVs have to do with failing to resolve a conflict. Relationships, work, where someone has done something at work and they're afraid to face the consequences and they end up doing such. Is that from a very young age, I don't think we teach kids that, we teach our children that, this is how you resolve a conflict. This is how you face problems. We shield them, or we shield our kids too much, or we don't have the right conversations with kids as we are raising them
up. Yeah.
And we had a conversation not so long ago with a few of my doctor friends, and we're talking about how parenting is so different. And one school of thought was kids were raised better back then, and we're still new parents. But Dr. Dima and I are doing very bad because we're trying to raise our kids in the Western way. The modern way,
yes. Yeah.
But I think, if we really look at adapting isn't just about picking the great skills from, or the new things and the good things. You're going to pick bad traits as well. Adapting is about how you then navigate both the situations, whether you parent your kids in the Western way or the old traditional way. How do you then get them to a point where a child feels strong enough to approach a parent and say, listen, I feel like I'm about to die, or I want to do this. How do I prevent myself from doing this? And I think it's very, very important to have these kind of conversations. I was emphasizing to my friends that, sometimes we underestimate the power of conversations amongst yourself as guys to a point where I know I'm in a safe space to say, guys, I have just been dumped and I am going through the most, and I feel like I'm about to end it, or I feel like I'm about to go and take someone's life. And your friends then sit you down and not say, no, let's go and drink and numb the pain. No, let's sit down and let's talk about this.
Yeah.
Let me share also that I've also been there, so that you notice that you're not the only person who's struggling, and it's not abnormal for you to struggle. Let me give you a little bit of tips of how I dealt with it. We can laugh about it later, but for now, let's have a conversation about it and deal with it differently. In the last 6-week session that we did with one of the organizations that I was working with, at the end, we did an honorary session where you honor the person next to you, and people selected people they don't know, and they had to find out.
Yeah.
And it was such a different thing, because another man was telling another man that, I value you for this, you're kind, you're this. And it was very weird.
It's very weird, yeah.
But it's something that needs to be done, because you also need to know that there's someone who respects you for you being you, and they understand that you're a good father, and they admire that, and they want to be like that. Or you're a strict person, and they have learned so much from you being strict, because you do it in a constructive way. And such kind of conversations, such kind of cycles actually have a huge impact on how our mental health is. We tend to neglect such, or we tend to not have that. We only have cycles of guys that we can go and drink and, hide away our problems, or we go and play football and we forget for that moment that we have a problem. But as soon as you get home, everything
goes back to...
Yeah. Majority of suicides, it's men on their own. Creating such kind of platforms creates, a vulnerable man who speaks about his problems will attract another vulnerable person to actually feel like, okay, I can talk to this person about this, to say, I'm also going through this. How best can you help me? Go to therapy, or I've went to therapy, or I've done this. And that on its own is very, very powerful.
And the sessions that you've had with the corporates, they like talking about these men's conferences where men talk their issues. Have you found them to be a bit effective? Have you found evidence of effectiveness when they, and the feeling of desperation and wanting to talk? What is the tempo of when you have, I've never had a session where men talk about themselves and they're all men. So I just want to appreciate the tempo, there's a bit of awkwardness and
like I said, I like data. I like data-driven solutions. When we do this, afterwards, you'd realize the change in the patterns of patients who come in to see me at the clinic. I've seen patients who come in, or men who've come in because they've heard of something that we talked about and
in these sessions,
and they felt like they could relate, but they couldn't maybe speak out at that point in time because they felt like this is too personal. And they'll come in and then they'll talk to me about it, and then we'll navigate the problem together. We'll get them to go and see a therapist, and then along the line, somebody else will come, few others will come. So because of these kind of sessions, we do have an increase in men who come in because of mental health issues, or just feeling like I'm overwhelmed by life and I feel like I need to deal with this better. You guys spoke about this, or you've spoken about this. How best can I then handle it myself, or navigate this without necessarily causing harm to me or the person next to me? So they are useful. There's evidence to show that, we're getting somewhere. Now we just need to do it in a bigger platform, cascaded all the way down to Banaba School. Started in earlier level. We sometimes focus on the adult and forget of the younger child.
The kids, and they are the future men.
They are the
builders of society.
They are the future men. And I think one of the things that I shared in the last thing was that, as a man, the one thing that you have to know is that you're building a society of men. Whether you are a dad, uncle, brother, colleague to someone, there's someone who looks at you and who wants to learn from you. And you have to then yourself be in a position to be able to teach, whether you want to or whether you don't want to. It's bound to happen. We don't live alone. We don't exist in silo. You have nephews, nieces,
cousins,
who look up to you. And the only way you can do it is if you're in a better position. Better position is you getting yourself help if you feel like you are struggling. And it's not wrong. It's not even weak. I repeat this, vulnerability is not a weakness. Accepting that you are struggling and you need assistance is not a weakness.
We'll talk about that because, men have to cry, that whole thing, and you have to come out. And I'm saying as a devil's advocate, would men speaking out, would men crying necessarily resolve the problem, or it helps but does not? Because the next question I was going to ask you is society actually conniving against men and boys? We've discussed the the manifestations, the suicides. Men tend to go into drugs more than women. Also translating into physical health. Guys, you've talked about guys, blood pressure, but when you talk more to them, you find out actually it's not these headaches. It's got an underlying matter. And I like to paint a picture of because Botswana, and there's a just this past weekend, I went to bury my uncle. I grew up without a present father. So he was very close to my mother because he had married my mother's elder sister. So, and when you mention, the first thing is that when you mention the fact that we don't acknowledge, I've also had the same thing. Now at this funeral, for the first time, I acknowledged the old man. But I should have done what he was. I should have, yes, a long time ago. He lived he was just shy of 94 years old. I think he was close to what you call really a happy soul. He was a man of faith. So he was very calm and collected in his life because he's got, the purpose is there. He loved his wife openly. He called him darling, sweetie. This is a man who was born in 1931. He saw he went through the Second World War. This is a man who was a solid protector. Now we're going to talk about masculinity. He was a protector. He would come out. There was one time where we had a family meeting. One uncle was trying to be funny on one of the nephews. He stood out and said, that will not be acceptable. You see, he stood out. And one of the things about the men that we see ourselves is that we should be protectors from a society point. That's why men go to war type thing. He had very close friends. A week will not pass when Dr. D without a friend coming and they spend hours chatting and laughing over tea. Remember talking about the whiskey. And he was also very neighborly. We had neighbors. That was a time when they were just fences. You would chat with the neighbor. So for me, he was not perfect. I'm not perfect. But I picked a lot of positives from him as a father. And one of the things today is that the families are not together. The uncles are not playing the role. The boy child is so isolated because we have more single mothers where so this way I'm going to say, have we set up this negative, unfortunate situation for the boy child and ultimately the man?
I think, in a way, if you really look into it, society is conniving in terms of it's more supportive of a boy child to fail than anything.
Yeah.
And society, don't get me wrong, when I say society, I know most people will think, no, we're talking about Basadi. Society, we mean everyone. Both genders are not in line with Wanamusimani getting somewhere. I'll explain why. As men, there's a lot of pressures that we put on other men, especially when a child is growing up. Women have expectations on men that I think sometimes they don't realize how these expectations actually mold or carve what kind of person this person is going to be. I was given an example about my son. we're driving from Francistown, we're parked Hamahalape, and his sisters are leaving him behind, and he's crying, he's trying to catch up to him. And
he's the last born, by the way.
He's the last born.
Yes, the sisters are older.
And someone, random guy comes and says, hey, Bahulidi said they don't know, soon you'll be bigger than them, and they will be better and do what And you see, society dictates or expects as a man for you to exert your masculinity or dominance has to be through physical. But there is more to it than that. You can actually stand up for yourself, stand up for people around you without necessarily having to lift a finger. I stand up for people who are my friends, who are my family. I'll stand up for my kids. I'll stand up for my spouse. I'll stand up for people who I feel are close to me without necessarily lifting a finger.
Did you learn that from something? It goes back to the issue where the boys don't have role models today. Just to.
So, boys don't have role models. I didn't have a father figure growing up. I had a mom who raised me well, babied me, but raised me very well. And I had to tell myself from observing certain things and looking at certain things to say, you know what? I think I want to be a different kind of man. I read. I listen to podcasts. I listen to a lot of things about parenting currently because I'm just like, can I be a different father to my kids so that they see a world in a different way? We don't have a lot of male mentorships. Even as a young person or as an elder person, you'd find very few of us have someone that they can go to who's a man and say, listen, I'm struggling with 1, 2, 3, 4. How can I best deal with it?
Yeah.
And we have so much expectations. Monna must provide. Monna must protect. Monna must do this. Nowadays in social media, the word indoda must. And all of these things.
Indoda must age difference.
The young ones know Indoda must is a South. I think it was coined from a South African saying that a man must. On social media.
Is it like a man is a man? A man
like Indoda must provide.
Oh, I got you. The provider part. Yeah.
Indoda must buy you flowers. Indoda must do this. And all of these things are said loosely, but they do put pressure on us as men. And we also then put pressure on ourselves. I always say, if you find yourself in a situation where you feel like you have to provide more than you can, then you're in the wrong place.
But the expectations are there.
The expectations are there.
I mean, we discussed with men just because I was in Nakano, around, you just had Christmas and then you have Valentine's Day, a bit of a foreign concept, which is putting a lot of pressure on men. And the expectation that the men should provide.
Provide for Valentine. But Indoda must buy flowers. And then you are thinking of flowers and then another Indoda is buying a car and you're just like, oh my
you're going to be compared to.
You're going to be compared to. And you see these comparisons as much as they come from us as society, not necessarily women, but even men. Social media has its ups and downs and we tend to try to live the life that we see on social media, which is not necessarily always a realistic kind of thing. Where you get to a point where you are now trying to give more than you can afford. And you're putting pressure on yourself because society has put pressure on you. And you have, like I said, one of the things that we struggle with as men, especially in our country, is conflict resolution. How do you deal with a situation where you can't handle things? Do you then accept that?
Can I just add something? We'll come to conflict resolution because I want to take you to one of the comments you made. Because now I found out that we are both from single moms.
Yeah.
Got something in common.
Yeah.
We're single moms. And the fact that you've worked on yourself to be a good husband, a good man, which we do, good people say, I didn't have a father. So what I want to ask you, do you think we end up maybe overcompensating? We work too hard? For example, as a provider, you now work so hard to the detriment of your availability to your kids and your partner.
Yes.
Because you've read, that I've got to be the provider. It's that overcompensation? Do you think there's a risk there?
No, it's not a risk. It's a possibility, and it happens. I'll give an example. For me, I knew there was a point in time I overcompensated where I felt like, you know what, I must work, I must do this, I must do this. And I think, like I said, a healthy relationship with people around you can then get you to a point where you realize that you actually just need to be supportive in this kind of manner and release or reduce stress on yourself that is imposed on you by society, but you have chosen to carry. Because there's a difference. Society puts pressure on us. Are you going to be the kind of man who carries it, even though you can't? Or are you going to be the one who says, okay, I can't carry this. This is what I can carry, and I'll take this load on myself. And this is how much I'm going to carry. I got to a point where I realized that, okay, you know what? Because I grew up without this figure, I'm trying too much to do this.
To be an ideal one.
Yeah. And obviously you have flaws along the way. Nobody's perfect. I'm no perfect person, but I want to be a great man. And how do I go up doing that? Do I then start surrounding myself with people who are great? Or do I then teach myself how to actually be the one that people come to and mentor them or actually push them to be better? That way, when I have a moment where I'm down the trenches, I have a circle of people around me who can actually pull me out of the trenches. Because that's very, very important. There is an overcompensating possibility, especially if you're coming from that. I once spoke about our origins. You choose whether we all have trauma. Majority of us, let me not say traumas, childhood traumas, but bad experiences when you were younger. And whether it's you being exposed to bullying when you were bullied as a child, whether you witnessed sexual abuse or gender-based violence in home, and you have to make an active decision to whether these experiences carve out who you're going to be, or they actually change you to be a better person because you know that these things are bad. And for you to do that, I think that's one of the things that we know, I hope we get to talk about, is the importance of therapy in our lives and actually seeking a professional.
We'll get to that,
Because for you to be actually identify these traumas and say, I have a problem with, I was bullied as a young child, and because of that, I'm a bully now. This has something, and how do I then change this? You have to be able to deal with it, have to be able to conceptualize everything that you have, experienced as a young person, and how you then use it to your advantage to shape the kind of person that you are. Not to define you, but to redefine yourself differently from how your past experiences are supposedly supposed to define you.
You before I intervene there, you're talking about conflict resolution. Do you want to just,
we struggle a lot. Like recently you've seen, there's a lot of, we call them passion killings. We call them, we've seen them in the past years, very bad situations where it goes without saying, it's not even specific to, social standards or classes. It's everyone. The learned, the people who don't have good financial backgrounds or people who don't have good educational background fall into the same spectrum. You find somebody who's, doctor, lawyer, prominent person in society falling in a situation where they either find themselves as perpetrator and a victim in gender-based violence, or a victim.
When they know better. They definitely know better.
When we'll say you should know better. Because our conflict resolution skills are very, very bad. And as men, we still go back to societal pressures. You get to a point where you feel like, as a man, I got to know. Or if and I don't handle this, it makes me look weak. And the only thing that we end up doing is what we're used to. Resort to violence. Our president says we're a violent nation. We resort to violence. We resort to abuse. We resort to all of these things that are very bad in terms of conflict resolution, which is one thing that we need to learn to do. How do we resolve conflicts without necessarily going to violence?
I am one who believes that we have lost some key components of our culture, which was phenomenal in addressing issues like that. Obviously, we live in a different world where in villages, let's say villages of 150, 200, largely the family structures will be in the same sort of neighborhood. And when there's issues, the uncles will come together, they will discuss, then you have the elder, then that was a conflict resolution structure. Now we're living in the world of isolation. I'm going behind the conflict. Conflict law, and it's not just the individual, it's societal structures that help to resolve conflicts, starting with the family. Families are breaking up. We have picked from the American nuclear family where it's just you, your wife, and your kids, and you're isolating yourself from the structures that are meant, from our tradition again, I can face criticism there, that are meant to come in during good times and during not so good times to come in. The boys, they don't, we used to play and I'm still very close to my cousins, some distant, some very close, some become closer because, you relate to different people differently. Yeah. So that way, you know who to talk to at the right time. And I'm sure that's part of that conflict thing where, someone can say, no, Brian, no. And then now we live in a world of loneliness, of boys closing themselves in the rooms, and the obsession with social media where they spend tons and tons of their time in smartphones, and the loss of social skills. We don't even know how to make friends anymore, So those are, what do you say? I'm trying to go behind the conflict because not just I need to know how to conflict resolution as a man in trouble, but is the environment friendly? Have I learned how to approach people?
We make the environment, We build our own society. Our society is this way because we have chosen or we have made decisions, whether it's net decisions or active decisions, to actually lead it to it being here. One of the things when you're doing a suicide risk assessment in medicine is there's a part where it checks for psychosocial support. It shows you that whether or not you have support puts you at risk of committing suicide.
Yeah. If you don't have it.
Yes. It's one of the things. It's one of the things that you tick to say, does the person have good psychosocial support? You tick to say, okay, less risk. If it's not good psychosocial support, it means you are at higher risk. Society or our tradition, as much as, yes, some people will say it supported this, which is what wasn't really great, or this, which was really great, we have sort of abandoned it completely. Earlier, I said we need to adapt things that are good, but also know that when we adapt things that are good, there's going to be the bad that come with it.
Correct.
And we have to find how to navigate around it. We don't necessarily have to abandon our norms, our culture, our tradition to live a Western
way of life.
Yeah, Western way of life. Those structures that we had in place were very, very helpful. That's why even now, you go to therapy. Therapy is external environment. It's extending yourself to other people so that they can give you a different opinion. Similarly to how, when you have a problem, they, and the thing is, no report you are saying. Thabang wa gana di-plate ko lapeng. Kana mo go reportiwa sengwe le sengwe, not just big problems where you wait until now. He's o sa la gana go tsa di-plate ke mo se morago di-place because I'm Australian, and then he fought back.
Yes, and it's a practice for the bigger, for the resolving the bigger issues, isn't it?
It's a practice for resolving bigger issues. It's similar to what I said earlier about having a cycle of support around you. Because now we have shifted to isolating ourselves in terms of family, where sometimes it's not necessarily a bad thing. Because sometimes you move yourself from a situation that's toxic to go and live a better life. But you need to surround yourself with people who are soundboards to you and who will be as neutral as possible to show you that, you're doing the right things here and here, but also to hold you accountable to say, we're not Thabang with the boat, how loud 1, 2, 3, 4, but Hari heads out on the bero bona post ko le mo majalong le mo gore mme o lla ka madi all the time or na le stress na le ngwana
khona go khalemela.
So similarly to how it was in the past where you had our uncles,
yes, and every elder was a parent.
We need those kind of systems in place. Every elder was a parent. You can see, kids in uniforms smoking. You can't say anything about it because if you do say anything about how dare you talk to my son? Who gave you permission? We have abandoned those things where Bana were even afraid to misbehave in front of adults out there. But that protected us. Me growing up, I knew that if we get in trouble and we see an adult, we run. If we're doing something that we're not supposed to be doing, it does not matter if we know them by face, we recognize them, but it's an adult. And we need to make sure we don't get in trouble because we know we get in trouble with this moholo. And then when we get home, we'll have to answer, how come you got in trouble with that moholo?
Yes.
Now it's more of a defense to say, why would you do this to Wanaki? And if we don't surround ourselves with those systems that we had in place to help us in terms of conflict resolution, that's why we're drawn back. We are really, really struggling. The amount of passion killings, GBVs, and there's a lot of it that's unreported. And I can tell you, there's even, if being honest, there's also men who are struggling, who are being abused in
relationships. Absolutely.
And whether it's physical, emotional, but it leads to the next thing. What you do is you exert your physical dominance because this person is emotional.
And that's the only thing you have.
And that's the only thing that you have. When you can't communicate, when you can't talk, when you can't fix it, the only thing you end up doing is exerting physical dominance.
And society is also conniving against you because chances are you were the propagator.
You were the propagator. And in most cases, I know women come for you when you say this. Women also need to be held accountable, right? They also need to acknowledge that sometimes you can't walk into a passage and expect not to get mugged.
Yeah.
Sometimes you also need to protect yourself as in such kind of situation where you see this person has violent tendencies. Don't say, now I can do 1, 2, 3. And then when they do it, you cry. Because yes, they're wrong, but this could have been prevented. You could have said, okay, before we get into this thing, go and get assistance, go and get help, deal with 1, 2, 3, 4 before we can actually sit down. Or I'm going to walk away from this because it's not an easy thing to do, but we also have to take some responsibility. Where you find yourself in a situation where you can walk away. Don't provoke the person because it will happen.
Yeah. Now, another one, which again, the conniving, social media. And another very controversial issue is the amount of time young boys spend on porn. And the other thing is the social skills where, for instance, in the States, they say most of the marriages now, over 50%, come through having the initial contact being online. And the success rate for those type of marriages is very, very poor compared to You know, I tell young men, so that skill of, but the main thing for the men is that we have now boys and men that don't know how to confront a difficult situation. In other words, it's easier to go online. Wow, Faisa, Mediela used to say, or Wanyana Ole. And I'd rather take the easy route, because they always take the easy route. And the easy route, you know, if you can't
So hide behind the screen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I always tell, you know, young people, even my nephews, guys, you got to learn how to be dumped. You know, it's part of growth, because then you're going to become a better husband because you know how to do it. But if you, apparently even the you know, young people in their 20s are having less sex compared to our time, even the 30s. And it's because they are now, you know, you know, they are just not engaging in what young people should be engaging on. I know this is a bit controversial, but there you go.
Yeah. Hey, it's a tricky one. You know, some of us used social media to get something at some point. But
that says a lot.
Yep. That's how
that's how it works. Yeah.
That's how I have 3 kids.
Is it?
But you know, I think one of the things that we need to do is we also need to, like I said, always balance. You can't have Bana spend time and all their time on screens. It actually limits them, not just physically, but even, you know, the intellectual capability to deal with things outside the screen is very, very important. They need to learn how to talk to a woman and she says no. And when she says no, you understand that it's a no. You don't badger her about it. You don't harass her about it. You deal with it in a different kind of way because it happened. We need to actually learn how to go out there and interact with other people and then notice how we are different. Because behind the screen, it's very easy to just talk. And you can't really show much emotion. I know there's, you know, emojis now that you can try to express emotions and everything. But there's a difference in talking to someone verbally. There's also a difference in learning things in person. There's also a difference in going out and putting your phone down and interacting with people or playing a physical game versus playing a virtual game. Yeah. Yes, these things are reality. Virtual reality is there. But we also have to know that we are human beings who exist in the physical space. Yeah. So our physical space has to be utilized. And that includes, you know, the dating scene. That includes physical activity, sexual activity.
And differences as boys, engaging. To say, and then actually arguing. And
you'd realize that because a lot of people engage in or watch a lot of porn, there's expectations to perform. Like
the expectations are raised. Yes.
That's why.
Those curated.
Those curated scenes. That's why you end up finding now men. I say this to a few of my friends in our social clubs. If you want to sell anything to men, tell them it enhances performance. If you grill this and do this and, you know, mix it with this and you drink it, you'll get there.
They'll get it.
They will buy.
Like because the famous 2 liters just outside debated there. That
and recently, if you're listening to RB1, there's I think 3 men who engaged in performance enhancers that died.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Traditional ones?
Traditional ones. Oh. Previously, we've had a patient, I remember as well, when I used to work in Princess Marina Hospital, patients who partook in these traditional things to enhance performance, had kidney failure, and they died. And all of this is because expectations has been raised. You know, performance, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, it's out of the normal. But everybody wants to do an hour. Now you end up taking all of these things because we watch things online. And we need to experience things, see things, do things to actually know that this is what I'm capable of and this is not what I'm capable of. If you're a healthy adult who is exercising, who has, a mental health awareness and stability, you should function properly, even in the bedroom. The problem is that we have our own stressors. We're not physically active and fit. We have hypertension because we're not eating right. We have diabetes. We have hypercholesterolemia. And then all of these medical things end dampening your performance. And then what do? You enhance.
Shortcuts.
You take shortcuts. I know they'll tell me there's healthy things, there's granola, you can do this, but I can tell you, just simply staying fit, staying healthy, you should be able to perform to you the ability of yourself.
Would you admit that it is when you have those pressures? I mean, we all have percentage of our life spent on social media, and the pawns and the competition and the statuses, that's just part of now how we have to learn to deal with. What I'm saying is the majority of people will be vulnerable simply because of who they are. I don't know if you get me.
I'm not sure I do, actually. But what I know, or what I can say, is that, like I said, social media has great use, but it also has a potential to cause harm. I mean, right now we are here, we're going to talk about this, and then this is going to be on social media, right? And this is how people are going to learn, this is how we learn nowadays. But there's also things that we can pick that are not really realistic. Spoke earlier about how I'm a man who works, who provides, and then I have other male counterparts who weekend after weekend, they're in franchise, lining up bottles, and I'm there thinking, why can't I do this? I can't even do this. These guys are living the life. Now it's seen as the life because on social media, they'll get likes, they'll get all these things. And I also want to get likes on my social media. Next thing I know, I go to a restaurant, I order an expensive bottle, just
18-year whiskey.
18-year whiskey. Take a picture, I post it. Just go feast someone.
Yeah.
So I have pressures that I now have to do more because I have accepted that society pressures, social media standards are going to overweigh me, and I'm going to carry them. I'm going to choose to carry them. Then I have difficulty dealing with certain things. And if you are somebody with kids, maybe you're not with your partner, and they say they're constantly putting pressure on you to what my baby mama this. But we've actually chosen to take social media standards and carry them. It's nice to see certain things, but you also have to have a reality check of your life versus other people's life. My father-in-law used to say, don't compete. Set standards for yourself. Or, don't envy people. You can choose to outdo someone, but don't envy people to a point where you want to do exactly what they're doing. You don't know what or how they can afford these things.
Exactly.
You don't know how somebody else is able to perform for 2 hours. You don't know how somebody else is able to afford this
car and this.
You don't know how somebody else is able to nowadays afford 2 wives. You just have to know what yourself you can do and you can't do, and you set expectations for yourself that are based on your capabilities and your goals, but not society or social media. Because let's not get it wrong. It's good to be competitive and to be, to set goals, to want to achieve and to want to, as long as it's done in a healthy manner.
Healthy way. Because you can learn from others who have achieved a bit more, but in a positive way, not putting yourself in, so much pressure that you are failing to do the most basic things of your life because you want to achieve something that is unachievable to you. Maybe not today. Maybe you can achieve it in the next couple of years, but because you are watching social media and you want to have a car today, yet you could choose to, trot on for the next couple of years, and maybe then that's when you can achieve that goal. Look at yourself, what you can afford as a man, especially with all the pressures that we have. You have to redefine what makes you whole. You have to redefine what makes you a strong man. Abandon, to a certain extent, the societal pressures, the social media pressures, and then redefine what makes you
a good person, a good man, and then focus on that. Because as soon as you do that, you become a beacon for another guy to actually say, I like how you're doing it. How are you doing it? And can you guide me into this? And it becomes a society of people who younger boys can then look into. We need those mentorships to cascade down to the kids who can then say, okay, I'm learning how this guy is doing it and is as natural and as authentic as possible without necessarily putting on a facade over social media. How then do I then attain that? And it's not passion now, it's influence.
Yeah.
There's a difference. Yeah.
Okay. We've talked about the conniving, the society, the social media and stuff like that, and also a bit of cultural copying on the Western way of doing things. Now we're going back to your practice. We've dwelt on the mental side quite a bit. And as a GP, the typical men problems from a physical health, the patterns, and then you can connect that again with the mental health, how you believe that some of them or the good percent of them actually connect. But what are the most common patterns in terms of men out there from a physical health perspective?
I think what I'll do is I'll share my thoughts. Could be wrong in terms of what we are struggling with as men nowadays. NCDs or non-communicable diseases have become a high prevalence in our country, and not only women, but men as well. In the past, even when we were in med school, when you read about diabetes, hypertension, those are the non-communicable diseases, your hyperlipidemia, you're looking at the elderly people.
Yeah.
When somebody says, somebody had a heart attack, you're thinking 60s or so. Nowadays, you find
even some cancers, they are going
even cancers.
lower. Yeah.
Nowadays, you'd find a 30-year-old who had a heart attack or a 30-year-old with high cholesterol. And it melts down to the lifestyles that we're living nowadays. Like I said, we still overburden ourselves with a lot of pressures to do certain things that we get to a point where we neglect ourselves. We constantly working because we are under pressure to perform, under pressure to provide, under pressure to be successful, to a point where you neglect your own, not just mental health, but physical health.
Your own tempo. Yeah.
A lot of us are obese. A lot of us have high cholesterol. A lot of us end up with hypertension, eventually having your strokes, your heart attacks. We have neglected our physical health. And I work a lot with, corporates and, your day-to-day 8 to 5 kind of employee. And I can tell you, majority of them spend so much time at work. They live a sedentary life where somebody goes into the office, they sit down, and your brain capacity, when it's functional, uses a lot of glucose, a lot of energy. You're going to get hungry.
Yeah.
The easiest thing to do is get fast foods or get snacks. And if that's all you're eating, you knock off at 8 p.m., you're tired, no time for gym, not even no time for family, not even no time for
friends,
recreate friends.
For God's sake, yeah.
And these things burden us both mentally and physically. We have seen a surge in terms of non-communicable diseases. Even at the clinic, I can attest that some of the organizations that we work with, you'll find 60% of the people that we see in from that specific organization have non-communicable diseases, whether it's diabetes or hypertension or high cholesterol. One of them, they will have some element.
What is the most common? What sticks out a lot more? And how does it relate to stress?
I think hypertension, and now I've realized cholesterol.
Yeah.
People are obese, they have high cholesterol. This in turn leads you to being at risk of developing, hypertension. And then you also have your diabetes. Like, they really differ, but they are now becoming a common existence and a common prevalence in our day-to-day consulting. And, we don't do, going back to men, men don't do screening. Basadi can go to the doctor almost every year and say, I can check. I want to make sure that I'm fine.
Yes.
Men don't do screening. From infectious diseases, you'd find a man say, Ma, but I'm tester. Nagada tester kawe. They don't go to. Yeah, it's a very. I'm gone.
Terrible.
And it's a terrible trait. If you bring them into the hospital and say, you know what, you have 1, 2, 3, 4. Maybe we need to do blood tests and check for 1, 2, 3, 4 because it could be that there are no doc, but I just have a headache today. Pay tablet and a headache. And we're just masking,
something that's maybe developing there.
Developing. So we need to encourage a lot of screening, and screening isn't just for the physical one, screening for mental health problems as well. And if we could push this to men as well as we do to women, and men have to be more receptive to doing it. Sky push okay, go screen is like, yeah, no, I'll do it. And then you wait for the end of the year, like Christmas or December, and then you get this like, doc, but if it's Christmas or end of the year, screening won't benefit me because I'm eating wrong, I'm drinking. So like January is a different story. It's like, hey, my dear, hey, delay. We need to actually push active screening in organizations, at homes, in the remote villages. We have an increase in prostate cancers where men identify to have prostate cancer at earlier ages.
Which is very easy to detect.
Which is very cheap. Very easy
very
to
simple
detect.
Blood test. Yeah.
Now, previously, men used to be so afraid to go to do prostate because that's not got the barano. Dr. Dima, when he gets that the bar, he's sticking a finger somewhere where I don't want it to be. But nowadays, we can do screening using blood tests if you're uncomfortable with that because it's not forced on you. It's a recommended test because you can pick up a few things, but it's not forced on you. You can do blood tests, you can do regular follow-ups to pick all these certain things. And it's very, very important that we do that because screening is actually the cheapest way to treat diseases because you prevent them in earlier stage and you avoid, expensive management when you catch it at a later stage. Men only go when there's a problem. When diabetes is now bad to a point where they have erectile dysfunction, that's when they come and they say, hey, doc, I can't perform. And you find when that happens, it's because this thing has been long-standing for quite some time and you haven't it's been unattended. And even then, you'd find they want you to give them something to boost performance,
not address the
root cause. So that's one thing that needs to change in terms of the physical health of men. We have to be more receptive to screening and actually be active in taking care of our health.
But what I'm hearing the biggest problem is this macho, hyper-competitive corporate cultures that is eating. You lose executives from heart attacks. Half the time you find that they didn't have time for screening. These days, blood pressure, you can have machines at home, check yourself on a daily basis. And then, like you said, even PSA to get men to go and check, it's a headache. But on that corporate pressures of us coming and having jumped this bandwagon of modernization and business, and I sometimes believe, again, borrowing the word of overcompensate, because we are new to this thing, we think to work 70 hours a week, to stay late at night on daily basis. Once in a while is fine. I'm a consultant. We sometimes have to work late. You have to finish reports, but you got to know that you got to rest the following day.
It's the corporate life is a stressful life. I work with them. I deal with them, and I can tell
I've lost friends. I've lost engineers who are very good guys, and I knew that they were just not doing the basic stuff.
It's not even amongst the doctors' fraternity, where you get to a point where we really overwork ourselves because you want to prove a point, you want to become the most successful.
The name in town.
Yes. But it's all good, provided it's not encroaching into your health. When I talk to my corporate clientele, I always tell them that, Bolo used to be, you have to have a balance. You have to have a balance 50-50. I call it a work-life equilibrium. Because sometimes it may not necessarily be that you're 50% this side makes sense. It may be that you have to have 60% or 70% at work and 30% at home. And this would be sufficient. The only thing and the only responsibility you have is to make sure that the 70% doesn't go into the 30. When it's time to go home, you protect it
with your life.
You protect it with your life. You set boundaries. When it's time to go home and
leave your laptop
at work. When you get home and you have kids, attend to your kids, attend to your spouse, attend to your partner, attend to yourself. When it's time for work, you go zone in, you get straight to work, you work, avoid distractions, and make sure that work gets done. I can tell you, when you are tired, you are least productive. You can be, if Molola, I can tell you, if you had rested, you'd actually have more output than if you're functioning tired. And I've seen this with patients where they come in and they have difficulty sleeping. And you help them out in terms of, okay, maybe you give them a day off. Maybe they've been struggling for a longer time with insomnia. You give them something to help them sleep. And then they'll sleep for a couple of days. And then they'll come back and they'll tell you, Doc, I'm now more productive because sleep is such an important part of our life. And we neglect it when you don't achieve this, work-life equilibrium, because you're going to end up now overworking and having less time to do certain things at home to a point where you're saying, okay, let me do these things. And then what they do is they end up finishing late. So they're now taking part of your rest pattern or your sleep pattern. Or you have to do it and wake up so early because you left behind at work, because on a weekend, instead of resting, we don't rest. We think we can and we partake in activities that actually tire the body and weaken the body even more. And then Monday, you're in Dr. Dima's office because you are exhausted and you need rest, but you had a whole weekend. And there's a lot of things, a lot of recreative things that can be done that are actually restful. Men don't believe, for example, men don't believe in meditating or
breath work and all
breath work and everything. And last year I started an app on Apple that guides meditation or guides your self thought moments. And it's actually helpful because I find myself making plans when I'm there sitting and thinking. I find myself making plans of how my day is going to go. And at the end of the day, I'll have self-reflection to see how much have you done? How much have you achieved? What was the distraction? Okay, Gamoso, how do you best avoid it? If you create work-life equilibrium, you're able to function, you're able to fit in gym, you're able to fit in your family because you make sure that nothing crosses over this side or nothing crosses over to that side. And I think that's key.
You've mentioned, and this is because we are coming to us the end now, and I'm glad you're already mentioning some of the solutions and focus on what men can do to really start helping and building the right habits for that total well-being. Well-being meaning the mental health and the physical health. So you mentioned the sleep, which is so understated as a powerful. I listened one time to a podcast of a lady who specializes in sleep science. And she says since 2017, getting enough sleep, 8.5 hours sleep, she hasn't had flu. So in terms of what it does to your immunity, basically, obviously, it goes back to what you said earlier. It depends on her system. It might work for somebody else and so forth. But sleep is extremely important. You talk about breath work. Is it anything else apart from meditation and sleep that, as we finalize, that you think for our people here, if they can take up those things, that will really help to prevent a lot of the stuff we discussed in this episode?
Yeah, adequate sleep is important to everyone. If you have lack of sleep, it suppresses your immune system. I mean, science shows it. You are bound to get more headaches, tension headache, because you have lack of sleep. Your BPs, if you are sleep deprived, wala. Yeah. But there's a lot of things
it's a natural chip.
Like the body's system is meant to shut down at some point in time.
Yeah.
Like, it's when you're sleeping, there's hormones that are released because you're sleeping. If you're not sleeping when that process is supposed to happen, you're disrupting.
It doesn't happen, yeah.
or it doesn't happen as efficient as it should be. Your short-term memory converts to long-term memory when you're resting. So your body needs time to convert everything that you've learned and solidify it because of sleep. If these things don't happen, it means you find difficulty functioning in your day-to-day life. Earlier we spoke about therapy. I think we underestimate seeking professional help, talking to a professional and actually opening up and letting things bear. Because what I've been to therapy, and what I've realized is that, when I was having a session with this guy, he was actually equipping me with the right tools to sort out what I'm struggling with. The tools that I had, I just didn't know how to use. And you needed somebody else
who would coach you how
to do it. We need mentorships. We need mentors. If you are also a mentor, you need to do a self-check on yourself. Find out if you're really coping, if you're doing well. We need screening. We need to make sure we check our body. We need to stay fit. Exercise goes a long way. And I know sometimes when people think exercise, thinking, I must go run comrades. No. Exercise is simply what your body can do. Walking reduces your risk of developing hypertension. It, reduces your risk of having heart attacks. Just walking.
Yeah.
So all of these things, if you find balance in your life, I go back to surrounding yourself with people who you can talk to and be vulnerable with. Vulnerability doesn't solve problems, but it's a start of identifying what the problem is so that you can come up with solutions. And you can have people who can then support you in coming up with solutions, or you can be confident enough to know that this is not the solution. So all of these things can actually help in just being a better person, being a healthier man, mentally and both physically. Yeah.
And you didn't have, we didn't talk about social media and the social aspect of, because I think, even meeting a therapist is a social skill. Do you think there is something, we discussed how boys need to learn how to interact, know how to approach an uncle, to say, and for the first time it's very awkward. And I think that becomes the wall where you say, I haven't talked to this uncle for the last 5 years, but I need help. I had all those things and very valid. I just want anything around because I really think maybe not even boys and men, even girls, the social skill, because you don't interact enough apart from work interaction with them. Is that fair?
I think that's a very fair statement, actually, to have social relationships that are actually very healthy and to, you're speaking of calling your uncle when you need help. It's one of the things that I also struggle with. I would forget to check up on an uncle. And then something happens and you're just like, crap. I have to call him now.
Exactly.
How am I going to these are kind of social skills that you actually need. And you can't learn them from like you're saying, social media. You actually have to be conversant with people out there.
Intentional. Talking to people. Talking to strangers.
One of the things I love about being home in Botswana is that you can get on a bus to Francistown, sit next to a stranger. By the time you get to Francistown, it's no longer a stranger. You've had conversations about everything.
Unlike the underground train in London.
Unlike the underground train in London. Unlike, if you are elsewhere where you get in, you sit down. Everybody is just like this. So you need to be out there, learn how to socialize, learn how to interact with people. And I think that's why sometimes people end up, committing suicide, is that they haven't learned that social skill to go and talk and to someone to say, I'm struggling.
Yeah.
How do I then say, okay, I need help? How can I call an uncle who I haven't spoken to in a long time? How do I then explain to him and deal with him? First, I have to navigate not being in contact. It's a social skill. You have to call and explain, hey, uncle, it's really busy.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
you have to get to a point where you then say, I need help. Similarly to when you go to a therapist, you're not going to get into a therapist and then say, listen, I'm struggling with 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a build up to it.
Yeah.
So those social skills are very, very important to build up to it, to get to a point where you actually acknowledge that, okay, I need help. And if you don't have them, it's also very difficult to listen, pick from everything that's been said, pick from it and choose to learn from it. Because it's not everything that's going to be said by the therapist that's going to be helpful to you. We're from different backgrounds. We learn things differently. We take things in differently. Sometimes, no. But you have to have the social skills to actually say, okay, I get to manage this, but actually this could apply in a different aspect here. And this is how I'm going to choose to learn from this experience. What do I take from it? And if we're constantly teaching our kids to be on our laptops, computers, Cocomelon is not going to teach them much, but speaking proper English, if you call it that. We have to learn those skills by actually being out there. Even similar, just to go on a little bit further. Similarly to, I've recently had to sit in an interview. That I've never done. For ages. No, I've actually never before. With med school, after med school, you come back from med school, you apply for becoming a doctor with Ministry of Health. Ministry of Health takes you in. And then for me, I've been privileged to, everywhere I went, it was like more of recruitment. It's like, dude, we've seen you do 1, 2, 3, come through and start working. And I had to now be different, go on an interview. And I realized that, okay, at my big age, I actually don't know how to introduce myself and to speak what I can do. And despite being on social media and doing all these things, it's the actual part of being there is different compared to the virtual platform.
The LinkedIns and...
It's very, very different. You get there now, you have to talk and they ask you a question that you didn't see on Facebook and you're just like, oops. No, that part didn't come up when I was reading, but now you have to learn how to navigate yourself around these things. So it's very, very important to have a social, aspect of life. It's key in doing better mentally and even physically.
Wonderful. No, thanks so much, Thabang, and I really appreciate it. I really hope dwelling on the men and did not present a negative thing, and because the conversation and the learnings from here, because we need each other. The boy needs the girl, the man needs the woman needs the man. So I hope as a woman, as a wife, as an auntie, as a girl child, all what we've discussed is something that they can take on and actually, also be supportive of the boy child, because as you said, sometimes they get criticized for not rising up to being a man, type thing. So those pressures are there. And I think the purpose of our conversation was to try to enlighten, share your perspective from having to deal with all these men and boys that come to you. And I hope it's been very helpful. Yeah.
I think also just, to mention it, if we did at some point in time ruffle a few feathers, I think it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay to have a voice that's different from what a lady at home may see as the right thing. And it's okay to then come back and give feedback and say, you guys said 1, 2, 3, 4, but you've got it wrong. The problem is that we're always so at war with each other to a point where we can't build each other.
There's negative connotations to the discussion.
There's negative connotations to discussions. If we're having a healthy discussion about how to uplift a man and somebody... the other gender comes and says, but you can't do 1, 2, 3, 4. It's how can we then come together and say, okay, you're doing this, but can you do it in this way so that it also does 1, 2, 3, 4 for the other gender? I think it's important to have these kind of discussions, and I'm very grateful. I feel honored to have been picked. I'm not sure I shared.
You rose up. No, you did, my man.
But
you did.
I really appreciate it.
No, thank you. Really appreciate it. All the best, Doc.
Thank you.
Cheers, my man.
Cheers.
Cool. All right. So there we go. Men and boys, mental health, physical health. You know what to do. Do the liking, do the sharing. Let's get this out there for Botswana and Africans to really learn a lot. Thanks so much and see you.